Imagine a being whose mere presence can destabilize the world. Someone so imposing that their essence was sealed into scattered pieces, only to one day awaken and threaten reality itself. What would drive an entity to be so feared, so hated, and at the same time, possess such sharp intelligence? Get ready, because what you're about to discover might change your perspective on the nature of danger and the mind behind it. In the vast universe of Jujutsu Kaisen, we are introduced to an ancient era, a time of chaos and darkness where the forces of nature and human fears materialized into terrifying manifestations. In this scenario, Ryomen Sukuna emerged, a figure so monumental that his legend echoes to this day. He wasn't just a danger. He was a force of nature, a symbol of unrestrained power, long before his essence was fragmented into mere cursed objects. The environment in which Sukuna developed was a constant battlefield, where survival depended on brute force and the ability to dominate. In this cauldron of conflict, Sukuna's psychology began to take shape. We can observe the first traces of a personality that valued dominance above all else. His ascent to King of Curses was no accident. It was the result of a relentless pursuit of power and a rejection of any form of limitation. From the beginning, Sukuna demonstrated an innate ability to manipulate and subjugate, viewing the world as a chessboard where he was the only player with complete control. His perception of himself as a superior entity, devoid of any need for external approval, is a fundamental psychological trait that solidified during this period. He didn't seek recognition, but rather the affirmation of his own supremacy through the display of his strength. The absence of empathy and the objectification of other beings were early characteristics which developed in an environment where compassion was seen as weakness. Sukuna's ability to thrive in a scenario of anarchy and conflict suggests a psychological adaptation that favors aggression and self-assertion. He didn't fit into any known social structure. He dismantled them to create his own. This initial phase laid the foundation for the mindset of a being who considers himself above any morality or restriction, living by a singular code of power and conquest. He saw no need to justify himself to anyone, and his existence was the very validation of his way of being. But there was something no one saw coming. What transforms a powerful being into an entity that revels in the suffering of others? For Sukuna, the breaking point seems to have been the consolidation of his unparalleled power. There was no external trauma that shaped him, but rather the absence of any real opposition, which led to a unique psychological development, an unprecedented megalomania. He became the pinnacle, and this position isolated him in his own grandeur. Sukuna's internal conflict isn't about regret or doubt, but about boredom. He seeks challenges that can alleviate the monotony of his own superiority. Externally, his transformation led him to treat the world as a stage for his own grandiosity. Psychology would explain this condition as malignant narcissism at its most extreme point, where empathy is non-existent and others are merely means to satisfy one's own desires. The universe to him is an extension of his will. The lack of worthy adversaries led him to seek increasingly intense stimuli, culminating in acts that would be considered highly dangerous by others, but for him were mere demonstrations of his capability. This absence of external and internal limits fueled a spiral of self-aggrandizement. The psychology of power suggests that, in certain circumstances, the acquisition of absolute power can corrode morality and the ability to relate to others in a healthy way. In Sukuna's case, this corrosion resulted in a personality that not only accepts, but celebrates the chaos he inflicts. He doesn't seek to dominate out of necessity, but out of a kind of art of subjugation, where every act of destruction is a brushstroke in his masterpiece of control. His mind has become an empire where he is the only sovereign, and the will of any other being is insignificant. He doesn't see himself as part of a collective, but as the only truly relevant entity. And that's where everything began to definitively unfold. As Sukuna's mind solidified into its most dangerous form, his thoughts and actions reveal a surprising structure. His words and attitudes demonstrate not just cruelty, but an unyielding logic. He doesn't act on impulsive urges, but on cold, precise calculation, where every move aims for a greater objective, the complete regaining of his power and the subjugation of everything around him. To get inside Sukuna's head, you need to understand that he operates under his own code, where strength is the only currency and weakness is an invitation to annihilation. We can draw parallels with the psychology of extreme autocratic leadership, where the central figure exercises absolute control, but without any regard for the well-being of others. Sukuna isn't chaotic by nature. He is an agent of calculated chaos, an engineer of disorder who seeks to reshape the world in his own image. His actions, though destructive, are logically consistent with his worldview. The way he interacts with Yuji Itadori, for example, is a case study in psychological manipulation. He doesn't try to convince or persuade. He imposes his will, exploiting the host's vulnerabilities and testing their limits. This approach reflects a mindset that views others as tools or obstacles, never as equals. The absence of remorse in his actions is indicative of a personality structure but does not conform to social or moral norms. He doesn't feel guilty about his actions because, in his own perception, he is simply exercising his natural right to be superior. This is the essence of a mind that considers itself beyond human judgment, operating on its own existential plane. He doesn't seek approval, but terror, because terror is the purest form of recognizing his power. His strategy is always to maximize his own gain while minimizing any risk, and he demonstrates an impressive ability to learn and adapt to circumstances, always seeking the ultimate advantage. But the true monster was still dormant. Sukuna's act of complete transgression was not a single event, but a series of choices that led him to position himself as a deity among dangers. His worldview didn't just change. It solidified into an unshakable conviction of his own superiority. He considers himself the law itself, morality itself, and anyone who dares to question this is worthy of contempt. Ethics, for Sukuna, are an empty construct, a restraint created by the weak to limit the strong. His rationalizations are brutal in their simplicity. If he has the power to do something, he will do it. This leads us to a disturbing dilemma. What if, in a universe where force is the supreme power, Sukuna's logic is, from his own perspective, correct? He represents the absolute freedom of a being without restraints, without remorse, driven only by his own will. A disturbing question arises. If you had unlimited power, what would stop you from acting like Sukuna? The absence of a point of no return for Sukuna lies in the fact that he never recognized a limit for himself. Every act of cruelty, every display of power, doesn't distance him from a moral path, but reaffirms him in his own truth. He doesn't regret because he sees no wrong in his actions. He sees only the manifestation of his intrinsic nature. The psychology of dehumanization is evident in his way of interacting with others, reducing them to mere objects or obstacles. This allows him to perform acts of great danger without any burden on his conscience. He operates with an extreme utilitarian logic, where an individual's value is measured only by their usefulness to Sukuna's goals. Morality is a concept alien to his existence, a human invention to try and control what is uncontrollable. He doesn't seek to be understood, but feared, because fear is the universal language of power. His conviction is so solid that any attempt to appeal to his humanity or ethical principles fails completely, as he has already transcended them in his own mind. Delving deeper into Sukuna's psychological analysis, we realize that his actions are guided by impeccable, though terrible, internal logic. He is not driven by random emotions, but by a constant pursuit of optimizing his power and influence. Every action, every manipulation, Every confrontation has a clear purpose in his mind. He uses intelligence and cunning as tools as powerful as his physical strength. We can apply game theory to understand how Sukuna operates. He is always calculating the next move, anticipating his opponent's reactions and exploiting their vulnerabilities. He doesn't fight out of anger, but out of strategy, turning every battle into an opportunity to solidify his position. Comparing him to other fictional antagonists, Sukuna resembles characters who operate with a cold, detached intelligence, focusing on the efficiency of destruction. It wasn't just danger. It was cold, meticulous calculation. His ability to anticipate and neutralize his adversary's actions demonstrates a mind that processes information at a superior level. He doesn't let himself be carried away by emotions like frustration or anger, which makes him an incredibly dangerous opponent. This absence of emotional vulnerability is a key trait of his psychology. Furthermore, the way he tests Yuji Itadori's limits, for example, isn't just for fun, but to understand his host's capabilities and weaknesses, using that knowledge for his own ends. This reflects a mindset of experimentation and control. The psychology of Machiavellianism can be applied to Sukuna, who exhibits a tendency to manipulate and deceive others to achieve his goals, regardless of moral consequences. He views the world as a set of pieces to be moved in his own game, and the lives of others are just a detail in this grand scheme. His coldness and emotional detachment allow him to make decisions that would be unthinkable for most, making him an unpredictable and devastating force that always finds a way to rise again and advance. What remains after a force like Sukuna manifests in its fullness? His legacy is not just physical destruction, but a profound transformation of the world around him. Sukuna's presence forces all other characters to confront their own limits, question their beliefs, and evolve in ways they never imagined. He is the catalyst for development, even if through the darkest path. This entity shapes the Jujutsu world not by construction, but by demolition, opening space for new realities and challenges. This leads us to a philosophical reflection. Who are we to judge the existence of a force that, in its very nature, seeks only to exist and prosper? Sukuna challenges the very notion of good and evil, presenting a perspective where power is the only truth. But perhaps he wasn't the only one to carry this flame of dominance. Sukuna's influence extends far beyond direct confrontations. He alters the very fabric of the character's reality. Those who face him are forced into deep introspection about their values and their own strength. He represents a dark mirror, reflecting the worst tendencies of unchecked power. The consequences of his existence are felt at all levels, from the devastation of cities to the shaking of power structures in the Jujutsu world. He doesn't just tear down buildings, but also ideologies and the established order. This ability to destabilize the status quo is one of the most impactful aspects of his legacy. The final reflection on Sukuna is that he embodies the archetype of the radical other, one who operates outside all human conventions. He forces us to consider the fragility of our own social and moral constructs in the face of a force that completely disregards them. His myth doesn't end with his defeat or sealing. It persists as a constant reminder of a being's capacity to transcend expectations and redefine what is possible, for better or worse, leaving an indelible mark on the memory of all who dared cross his path. The journey into Ryomen Sukuna's mind shows us that danger doesn't always lie in madness, but rather in an implacable logic devoid of any empathy. He isn't a being of random chaos, but of structured and calculated destruction, where every step serves a greater purpose of domination. His existence forces us to question, to what extent can the pursuit of power distort a soul, transforming it into something that defies the very comprehension of humanity? Sukuna's shadow remains, a grim reminder that, sometimes, the greatest danger lies in the mind of one who sees themselves above all else.